Hello, Pendragon. Just Miss Elliot here. I'm back to read you The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch by Rhonda and David Armitage, and this is what we're going to be basing our English tasks on this week. So here we go. Once there was a lighthouse keeper called Mr. Gringley. At night time he lived in a small white cottage perched on the hill high on the cliffs. In the daytime he rowed out in his lighthouse on the rocks to clean and polish the light. Mr. Grinling was the most industrious lighthouse keeper. Come rain or shine, he tended his light. Sometimes at night Mr. Gringley lay sleeping in his warm bed. The ships would toot to tell him that his light was shining brightly and clearly out to sea. Each morning while Mr. Gringley polished the light, Mrs. Gringley worked in the kitchen of the little white cottage on the cliffs, concocting a delicious lunch for him. Once she prepared the lunch, she packed it into a special basket and clipped it onto the wire that ran from the little white cottage on the lighthouse to the lighthouse on the rocks. But one Monday, something terrible happened. Mrs. Gringley had prepared a particularly appetising lunch. She'd made a mixed seafood salad, lighthouse sandwich, cold chicken, sausage and crisp, peach surprise, icy biscuits, drinks and assorted fruits. She'd put the lunch in the basket as usual and sent it down the wire. But the lunch did not arrive. It was spotted by the 3 scavenging seagulls who'd set upon it and devoured it with great gusto. "Clear off, you vermite," shouted Mr. Grinling, but the seagulls took not the slightest notice. "This is an excellent peach surprise, boys. She's great, Cook Fred. Scrumptious lunch, Tom." That evening Mr. and Mrs. Grinling decided on a plan to baffle the seagulls. "Tomorrow I shall tie the napkin to the basket," said Mrs. Grinling. "Of course, my dear," agreed Mr. Grinling. "A sound plan." "They'll have to try harder than that to stop us, Bert." On Tuesday evening Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains for another plan. "They are a brazen lot, those seagulls," said Mrs. Grinling. "Brazen indeed," said Mr. Grinling. "What shall we do?" "Our cat does not appear to like seagulls," said Mrs. Grinling. "No, my dear," said Mr. Grinling. "Hamish is an accomplished seagull chaser." "Of course," exclaimed Mrs. Grinling. "Tomorrow Hamish can guard the lunch." "A most ingenious plan," agreed Mr. Grinling. Hamish did not think that this plan was ingenious at all. He spat and he hissed as Mrs. Grinling secured him in the basket. There, Hamish," said Mrs. Grinling consolingly. "I'll have the tasty piece of herring waiting for you when you arrive home." Hamish doesn't want to go at all. Sadly, flying did not agree with Hamish. His fur stood on end when his basket swayed. His whiskers drooped when he peered down at the wet blue sea, and he felt much too sick even to notice the seagulls, let alone scare them away from the lunch. "Pretty giddy like a piece of lobster, Moy. This food gets better every day, Fred. Aren't you going to chase us, Kitty?" "Lackaday, said Mrs. Grinling sadly. "Meow, meow," agreed Hamish pitifully. On Wednesday evening Mr. and Mrs. Grinling racked their brains again for a new plan. "What shall we do?" said Mr. Grinling. Mrs. Grinling looked thoughtful. "I have it," she explained. "Just the mixture for hungry seagulls." "Indeed, my dear," said Mr. Grinling. "What have you in mind?" "Wait and see," said Mrs. Grinling. "Just wait and see." "Mustard sandwiches," clucked Mr. Grinling. "A truly superb plan, my dear. Truly superb." On Thursday morning Mrs. Grinling carefully packed the mustard sandwiches and sent them off down the wire to the expectant seagulls. Yuck! Ugh! Ah! On Friday Mrs. Grinling repeated the mustard mixture. "All right, boys, let's go and have lunch elsewhere." It's the same as yesterday's lunch, Fred. So on Saturday, up in the little white cottage on the cliffs, as jubilant Mrs. Gridling put away the mustard pot before she prepared a scrumptious lunch for Mr. Grinling. While he waited for his lunch down the lighthouse on the rocks, Mr. Grinling sang snatches of old sea shanties as he surveyed the coastline through his telescope. And this is what he saw. No mustard in this lot, Tom. We'll fly back here for lunch again tomorrow, boys. This is a delicious chocolate eclair, Fred. They found a new person to steal lunch from. Ah, well, such is life, mused Mr. Grinling, as he sat down to enjoy a leisurely lunch in the warm sunshine. There we go. Oh, last page of Mr. Grinling enjoying his lunch. So, there was our lighthouse keeper's lunch. Now, hoping that you will be able to have a go at the activities this week that I have set to do with the lighthouse keeper's lunch. And hopefully I'll see all your attempts